Do you know that agonizing moment when you're in the middle of a conversation, looking at a common object or the face of a dear friend, and the name simply vanishes from your mind? You know exactly what it is. You feel the word on the tip of your tongue, but it gets stuck, refusing to come out, creating an awkward silence that you try to fill with gestures or generic phrases. Maybe you've justified it to yourself by saying it's just tiredness, stress, or those famous things of age that everyone says are normal. But I need to be brutally honest with you now. Your speech is not just a tool for social communication. It is the most direct, sensitive, and immediate reflection of your neurological health and the complexity of your brain connections. When the word fails, it's not just a lapse of memory. It's your brain sending a smoke signal indicating that microcirculation or neural chemistry may be compromised, and ignoring this is missing a golden opportunity for prevention. Many people believe that brain aging begins when we forget where we left our keys or when we can't remember what we had for lunch yesterday. But modern science shows us a different and much more subtle scenario. Speaking is one of the most complex activities that humans perform. It requires the simultaneous and perfect recruitment of memory, motor function, auditory processing, and speed of reasoning. Therefore, subtle changes in language, those that you and your family may be ignoring or treating as a joke, are actually the first biological markers of neurodegeneration, silent microstrokes, or cognitive decline. These signs appear years, sometimes a whole decade, before any visible motor symptoms or the severe memory loss that characterizes diseases like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. And it is precisely in this interval that we can and should act. To understand what's happening inside your head, imagine your brain as a vast, ancient library where the books are the words and the librarian is your neural processing system. In a young, healthy brain, the librarian is agile, running through the corridors of Broca's and Wernicke's areas, the regions responsible for language production and comprehension, and bringing the right book in milliseconds. However, when we begin to accumulate toxic proteins, such as beta amyloid, or experience failures in the irrigation of small blood vessels, it's as if the corridors of this library become obstructed, or the librarian becomes exhausted and slow. Access to the archive is interrupted, not because the word has disappeared, but because the path to it is damaged. This is where the vital concept of cognitive reserve comes in, which is your brain's ability to improvise and find alternative routes, something we need to protect at all costs. The seriousness of what we will discuss today is supported by robust longitudinal studies that followed thousands of patients and revealed an alarming fact. Specific linguistic changes can precede the clinical diagnosis of dementia by up to 10 years. We are talking about a gigantic window of opportunity that is frequently wasted due to lack of knowledge. Recent statistics show a direct correlation between the reduction of active vocabulary, those words you use daily, not just those you know, and mild cognitive impairment. Furthermore, many cases of silent strokes or transient ischemic attacks initially manifest as mild dysarthria, slurred speech lasting only a few minutes, which, if identified in time, can save your autonomy and prevent permanent sequelae that would devastate your independence and isolate you socially. Today, we're going to break this cycle of neglect and normalization of serious symptoms. I've prepared a practical guide for you to learn how to identify the 5 warning signs in speech that differentiate natural aging from serious pathologies requiring immediate medical attention. By the end of this video, you will have the ability to perform an accurate self-analysis or observe your family members with a clinical and protective eye, allowing for the pursuit of an early diagnosis that is crucial to slowing the progression of neurodegenerative diseases. Before we begin this list that could save your lucidity, I want you to answer me quickly in the comments below. Have you felt that your vocabulary has decreased or that it's become more difficult to find the right words lately? Be honest, because this answer is the first step towards your awareness. Now that you understand the gravity of what's at stake, let's structure our knowledge into a progressive list designed to guide you from the most subtle and common signs to those that sound like emergency sirens. We'll navigate together through 5 crucial markers. Pay close attention, as number 4 is often a vascular red alert that many confuse with fatigue, and number 2 is the symptom that most often generates silent social isolation. But it all starts with something that seems harmless, something that probably happened to you this week, and that serves as the gateway to understanding the health of your temporal lobe. Persistent difficulty with naming. Let's start with sign number 1, which we technically call anomie, but which you know intimately as the word on the tip of the tongue phenomenon. This is the stage where the intention to communicate exists. The image of the object or person is clear in your mind, but the verbal label simply doesn't connect. We're not talking about that sporadic forgetting of a movie actor's name that you haven't seen in years, which is perfectly normal. We're talking about the frequent inability to name everyday objects, like a pen, glasses, or a grandchild's name, forcing you to replace specific names with generic terms like that, thing, or thing. To understand what happens physiologically, we need to look at the left temporal lobe of your brain, the region that functions as the great archivist of your vocabulary. Anomia is not a problem of storage. The word hasn't been erased from your memory. It's a problem of access. Imagine that the neural highway leading to the word is potholed or blocked by failures in synaptic transmission. The brain tries to find the word, encounters a blocked path, and enters a cycle of frustration. In healthy aging, this highway may have slightly slower traffic, but access occurs. In neurodegeneration, the highway begins to disappear, and the brain loses the ability to retrieve the correct label for the object. The real-life impact of this is a subtle but devastating change in the quality of your communication. You start making huge detours to ask for something simple. Instead of saying, "Please pass me the salt," you say, "Pass me that white thing on the table to put on the food." Family members often complete the sentence for you, creating a false sense of normalcy, but in reality, it's masking the symptom. If this happens daily, several times a day, it's not distraction. It's your lexical access system crying out for help. This behavior of circumventing words is a defense mechanism of the brain to hide the flaw. But it's precisely this that we need to monitor. The good news is that we can test and stimulate this function right now with a simple verbal fluency exercise, widely used in clinics. Try, in a quiet moment, to time yourself for 1 minute and say aloud as many animals as possible that begin with a specific letter, such as the letter F or A. A brain with healthy access should be able to list at least 12 to 15 animals without significant pauses. If you struggle a lot, note this as a point of attention. And if the difficulty in finding the word is already bothersome, the next sign is even more insidious because it doesn't just attack an isolated word, but destroys the entire structure of your thought process mid-sentence. We now move on to sign number 2, a situation that generates deep and silent anguish, the loss of the thread. Imagine you are in the middle of an exciting story, describing a recent event to a friend, and suddenly, as if someone had pulled the plug, your mind goes completely blank. You stop, look around, and have no idea what you were saying, or worse, what the purpose of that conversation was. Unlike a momentary distraction caused by an external noise, here the blackout is internal and absolute. This happens due to a failure in your working memory, which functions as a temporary mental notepad located in your prefrontal cortex. It is in this notepad that the brain holds the beginning of the sentence while you construct the end of it. When this system fails, the information evaporates before it is completed. This failure in working memory is one of the symptoms that most causes social isolation in old age. The elderly person realizes that they cannot sustain long arguments or keep up with the pace of a dinner table full of people talking at the same time. To avoid the embarrassment of repeatedly asking, "What was I saying again?" the person chooses to remain silent, becoming a passive observer of their own life. It is vital to differentiate this from a simple attention deficit. If this disconnection happens frequently and is accompanied by apathy, it may be an early indication that the executive areas of the brain, responsible for planning and sequencing ideas, are suffering from neurodegeneration. It is not a lack of interest in the conversation. It is a biological inability to keep information online in the mind. If you identify with these signs or know someone who is going through exactly this, I ask for a second of your attention. Click the like button and check if you are subscribed to the channel. This small action helps YouTube understand that this content is a public health tool and brings it to more people who need this information now. That said, let's move on to sign number 3, which is perhaps the most treacherous of all, because it doesn't look like a mistake, but rather a change in style, grammatical simplification, and the exclusive use of short sentences. This sign goes unnoticed because the elderly person continues to speak, continues to communicate, but the richness and complexity of their speech drastically crumble over time. What occurs here is a fascinating and sad biological defense mechanism. The brain begins to operate in energy-saving mode. Constructing subordinate clauses, long sentences with multiple commas, and using a sophisticated vocabulary requires intense neural processing and high metabolic demand. When the brain senses that its resources are scarce, whether due to lack of adequate blood flow or neuronal death, it cuts out the superfluous. The elderly person who previously wrote detailed letters or debated politics with profound arguments begins to communicate telegraphically. "I'm going out, it's cold, I ate well." Linguistic analysis studies of diaries of patients who developed Alzheimer's show that this grammatical regression begins years before medical diagnosis, serving as a silent trace of the disease. You can observe this in practice by noticing if there has been a sudden loss of interest in complex readings. That person who loved dense novels now only reads newspaper headlines or prefers to watch simple TV programs because the cognitive effort to process long texts has become exhausting. It's not mental laziness, it's a functional inability to deal with syntactic complexity. But note, so far we have talked about problems in mental processing, in what happens before speech comes out. The next sign, number 4, is different and much more urgent, as it manifests in the mouth, in the physical part, and may be a warning of a vascular event that requires you to rush to the hospital immediately. We've reached sign number 4. And here, I need you to stop everything you're doing and pay close attention, because this is a biological red alert. We're talking about slurred or muffled speech, technically known as dysarthria. Unlike the previous items, where the problem was finding the word in your mind, here the problem lies in the physical execution, in the mouth. Suddenly, the articulation of words changes, as if the tongue were heavy, numb, or as if the person had ingested alcohol, even if they are sober. The voice may come out slurred, whispered, or with strange variations in volume. This happens because speech requires fine and millimetric coordination of the cranial nerves and dozens of muscles in the face, tongue, and throat. When there is a failure in this orchestration, the resulting sound is immediate and frightening. The urgency of this sign lies in the fact that it is often the main indicator of acute vascular problems or severe central motor failure. Dysarthria that appears suddenly, even if it only lasts a few minutes and then improves, can be a sign of a transient ischemic attack, a microstroke, indicating that a part of the brain has suffered a brief interruption of blood flow. If you notice this in someone, immediately apply the SAMU test. Ask the person to smile, check if the mouth is crooked, hug, check if an arm falls, and sing a song or speak a simple sentence. If the speech is slurred, don't wait for it to pass. This is a medical emergency. In a chronic and slow progression, this muscle rigidity in speech can also be one of the first motor signs of Parkinson's disease, long before tremors in the ends appear. If sign number 4 is the most physically dangerous, sign number 5 is undoubtedly the most emotionally painful for the family and the one that most tests the patience of caregivers. Repetition of stories and questions, or looping. You answer a question about lunchtime, and 3 minutes later, the person asks the exact same question with the same intonation, as if the previous conversation never happened. Or they tell the same story from their youth 5 times in a single dinner. It is crucial to understand that the elderly person does not do this to irritate, test you, or due to lack of attention. They do it because the mechanism for recording recent memory has failed catastrophically. The scientific context here points to a failure in the consolidation of short-term memory, a primary function of the hippocampus. Imagine that the brain has a save button that should be pressed immediately after an action is completed. In the brain with neurodegeneration, this button does not work. The elderly person asks the question, receives the answer, but the brain does not register the information that the doubt has been resolved. For them, the need for the question remains alive and urgent, as if it were the first time. They are trapped in a temporal loop of a few minutes where the present cannot transform into the past, preventing the natural progression of dialogue and interaction. The impact of this on family relationships is immense, generating friction, curt responses, and isolation. The advice here is to change your perspective. When you hear the same question for the 3rd time, don't respond with, "I already told you that," because this aggressiveness creates confusion and hurt feelings in someone who, honestly, doesn't remember. Treat the repetition as a clinical symptom, as involuntary as a cough or fever. Respond calmly, shift the focus of attention, or use visual cues. Understanding that this is a hippocampal malfunction and not a nagging personality trait is what will allow you to care with love instead of anger. And now that you know the signs, we need to talk about what to do with all this, to turn the tables in your favor. I know that digesting this information can be nerve-wracking, especially if you recognized yourself or a loved one in one or more of these 5 signs. It's natural to feel fear, as we've been conditioned to believe that mental decline is an irreversible sentence, a cruel and inevitable fate that arrives with the candles on the birthday cake. But I need you to take a deep breath now and radically change that perspective. Identifying these warning signs isn't the end of the line. On the contrary, it's the beginning of your defense. Knowledge is the only tool capable of transforming paralyzing fear into strategic action. And it is precisely here that modern science brings us a powerful message of hope and renewal. The first fundamental step towards recovery is the immediate removal of guilt. Often, the elderly person feels ashamed of not being able to complete a sentence, feeling silly or useless, while the family, due to a lack of information, interprets the slowness as stubbornness or lack of effort. We need to understand, once and for all, that their brain is not failing due to laziness. It is asking for biological help. These speech impediments are symptoms of a mechanism that needs oil, not judgment. By removing the moral weight from the situation and facing it as a health challenge, You remove the emotional stress, which ironically is one of the biggest villains for memory, as high cortisol further blocks access to memories. The major turning point lies in a concept that has revolutionized neuroscience in recent decades: neuroplasticity. Previously, it was believed that the brain stopped developing in adulthood and that, from then on, it was downhill. Today, we know that this is a lie. The brain retains the ability to create new synaptic connections and alternative routes until the last day of life, provided it is properly stimulated. If the main road to a word is blocked with the right training, speech therapy, and cognitive exercises, your brain can pave a detour, a new route to access that same information, keeping you functional and communicative for much longer. However, this plasticity doesn't happen by magic. It requires professional intervention and proactivity. The worst thing you can do when you notice these signs is to wait to see if it improves. In neurology, time is brain tissue. Seeking a neurologist at the first sign of difficulty with naming or grammatical simplification allows you to start treatments that can halt the progression of diseases or control vascular risk factors. Speech rehabilitation therapies aren't just about speaking better. They serve to keep the brain active, forcing the maintenance of those Broca's and Wernicke's areas we mentioned at the beginning. Besides medical help, there's a remedy you can't buy in pharmacies, but it's vital for the health of your speech: social connection. Isolation is the most potent accelerator of dementia. When you distance yourself from people out of shame for mispronouncing a word, you deprive your brain of the most complex stimulus that exists: human interaction. Conversing, even with difficulty, forces your neurons to work. Don't hide. Explain to your friends and family what's happening. Say, "Be patient. My processing is a little slower, but I want to talk." This coping attitude keeps your cognitive reserve high and combats depression. Therefore, the scenario we've outlined here isn't meant to generate panic, but to validate your intuition. That feeling that something isn't right now has a name and a scientific explanation. You're not imagining things, and that's liberating. Now you have the power to differentiate between natural aging and a pathological warning sign. And more importantly, you understand that passivity is the only wrong choice. With this clear understanding, we can move towards the conclusion of this reasoning, where I will show you how to integrate all of this into a daily attitude of mental protection. We've reached the end of this journey, and I hope you leave this video feeling much more in control than when you clicked to watch. Together, we've uncovered that speech isn't just a sound coming out of your mouth, but a detailed map of your neurological health. To recap what we've learned: words on the tip of the tongue, losing the thread of a thought, simplifying sentences, slurred speech and looping repetition aren't mere whims of old age. They are the 5 biological markers your body uses to scream that it needs attention, care, and often medical help. Now you possess the decoder for these signals. What was once viewed with fear or irritation can now be seen with clinical clarity and compassion, allowing you to protect yourself and the people you love from silent and prolonged suffering. The practical application of this knowledge is what differentiates those who age frailly from those who age strategically and vigorously. I want to encourage you not to let this video be just another piece of content you watched and forgot. Do this self-analysis today, at your next dinner or on your next phone call. Notice how you're constructing your sentences and observe your family members with an attentive eye, not to judge, but to support them. If you notice any of these signs, persistently, remember our promise of hope. Seeking an early diagnosis is the bravest and most effective act you can take for your independence. Don't wait for a crisis to set in. Prevention is the shield that ensures your story continues to be told by you, in your own words and with your memories intact. Preserving your voice is ultimately preserving your identity and your place at the family table. When we keep our communication skills sharp, we ensure our autonomy to express desires, share wisdom, and say, "I love you," clearly. Don't accept silence or isolation as a natural part of aging. Fight for your voice, exercise your vocabulary, keep your social connections alive, and treat your brain as the vital and precious organ it is. Science is on our side, offering paths and treatments that were unthinkable years ago. But the initial initiative to perceive the problem and seek a solution will always have to come from you. You are the primary guardian of your mind. Now, I want to hear from you, because your experience enriches our community. Scroll down to the comments and answer me honestly. Which of these 5 signs caught your attention the most? Or which one have you noticed in yourself or a close family member? Write, for example, number 1, word on the tip of the tongue, or number 5, repetition. Sharing your story not only helps you process the information, but also shows other people reading the comments that they are not alone in this battle. Let's transform the comments section into a welcoming space for sharing real experiences about health in the 50+ age group. If this content brought you clarity and shed light on your brain health, I have a special invitation for you. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Our mission here is to create an army of mature, informed, and proactive people who don't accept decline as the norm. By subscribing, you ensure you'll receive our upcoming videos with practical, scientific, and direct guidance for living a long and high-quality life. And if you thought of someone specific while watching, a father, a mother, a friend, share this video with that person now. It could be the push they need to see a doctor and change their life. Finally, an important and necessary warning. Although all the content in this video is based on scientific data, neurological studies, and current medical literature, this material is for informational and educational purposes only. I'm a screenwriter and communicator passionate about health, but this video does not, under any circumstances, replace a medical consultation, a clinical diagnosis, or the guidance of a neurologist or speech therapist. Each brain is unique, and similar symptoms may have different causes. If you have identified warning signs, the official recommendation is always to seek a qualified healthcare professional for an individualized and safe assessment. Take good care of yourself, and until the next video.